Hey there, everybody. It's Susan Steele and Emily Crookston. We're here to do another one of our book reviews. Yay. I've been talking a bit about this on my LinkedIn feed, so if you've been following me, you know that I've been reading Adam Grant's book, Think Again, and we're here to review the book. So as is our custom, I'll do a quick summary of the book. The thought here is, think again. You want to rethink your beliefs, your assumptions, that kind of thing, kind of on a regular basis, if you can, I think he would recommend. And the sort of motivation for the book is like something like this. Intelligence is usually seen as, the ability to think and to learn, but in the, overly saturated maybe world that we live in, where knowledge is at our fingertips and it's very easy to get it, and knowledge moves really quickly, it turns out that one of the best cognitive skills you can have is the ability to rethink and unlearn. So rather than being really intelligent and what we think of as like memorization, that kind of stuff, kind of out the window, what's better is if we're able to sort of challenge our own beliefs. And he says, he makes this analogy between, we often think too much like a preacher. So we're really defending like our sacred beliefs, and we're afraid, if doubt comes in, we run away screaming, or we act as prosecutors, where we're trying to convince someone else to take our view, and we're like beating them over the head with what we believe is right. Or we often act as like politicians, where we're seeking the approval of other people. And so he says we need to shuck all that and back off way down on that kind of stuff and work toward this model of thinking again and rethinking our thoughts. And so just quickly, the book has 3 parts. The first part is about individual rethinking. So rethinking stuff for yourself. The second part is about interpersonal rethinking, which is, I think, probably my favorite part. I took a lot of notes in that second part, how to help others rethink their thoughts rather than beating them over the head like a preacher or a politician or prosecutor. And then the last part is on collective rethinking. So how we can rethink beliefs and assumptions.
That was almost my favorite part.
So it's a really nice setup. Yeah, cool. Yeah, that part was really
sorry, I
insightful
interrupted
as
you.
well. No, that's okay. We got a little delay. It's cool. Yeah, so what did you love about the third part? We can start from the back.
I think it was when he was talking about the teachers that he was talking to, teachers and professors, and sort of how they help students learn, and the idea of questioning the data that you're looking at. I mean, when I think back to when I was in school, you didn't question anything. The teacher's there. The teacher tells you what's true,
Yeah.
and you just accept it because it's coming from an authority figure. And teaching kids that little, I mean, he was giving examples from really like elementary school kids to have that kind of healthy doubt about what you're reading, what the source is.
Right.
It's like, man, I want that kind of teacher.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. The idea of thinking like a scientist, right?
Mhm.
And bringing, yeah, for sure. I've had professors. I probably was one of these professors at one point where I was on the pulpit, like preaching to the students, like, you should believe this. And, I always thought about, if a can opener, like if I could just open your brains and pour the information in, that would be great. But yeah, the idea that, that you can actually, get students to rewire their own brains in the classroom on the fly. Yeah, I thought that stuff was really interesting and really cool, and definitely, applies to community as well.
Absolutely, yeah. And then he also talked about um, collective decision making in the context of the workplace, and having learning workplaces, and what that means, and really having that psychological safety to be able to question things, or maybe doubt what you're seeing, doubt the data you're seeing, without it being, without having to be afraid about getting reprimanded or losing your job. And that really, I think a lot of companies talk about that. Well, yeah, we're really open. Managers say my door's always open, come and talk to me.
Right.
But when you get to the practice, I wonder how often
Yeah.
that's really true.
Yeah, especially I'm thinking about the information tied back. It's in one of the earlier sections about how managers overestimate their skills, right? And with the Dunning-Kruger effect,
Yeah,
that whole part about how, the most confident people are actually the least competent at what they do. And we all have a tendency to overestimate our own skills in certain areas of our lives. But yeah, he had a really interesting survey of managers in particular, and having them scored, kind of in objective terms, I suppose,
right.
versus how they thought they'd score, and it's really eye-opening. And so when you combine that with, oh, we have an open, workplace where everyone can question everybody, and we have this kind of challenge network of people involved, you wonder how realistic that is, and it
Yeah.
requires, I think, a lot of cultural change, right? And you can't
Mm,
just say
yeah,
we're a workplace where everyone questions everything, and it's okay to make mistakes. This kind,
yeah.
you should take risks, that kind of stuff. You have to actually pave the way for it. So yeah, that psychological safety
Hmm.
concept that you raised is really important. Let me see if I have a note about that. Yeah, I had process accountability plus psychological safety gives you
Yeah,
the learning environment.
yeah,
So I thought that was really key as well. Like everybody's got to hold everyone accountable within this system in order for it to work. And then you have to have the psychological safety on top of
and
that.
I liked how he talked about outcome accountability and process accountability.
Good.
And, the output accountability focuses on what the end result is.
Hmm.
And he gives some great examples, I thought, from NASA and around
Hmm.
the two space shuttles that
Yeah.
were destroyed and how NASA got to that point. It
Hmm.
even made me think, I don't know, have you been following the Theranos case about Elizabeth
Hmm.
Holmes?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so it kind of got me thinking about that a little bit. It's like,
Hmm.
what, how did you get to that point?
Hmm.
Who wasn't saying something or who was afraid to say something
Yes.
till you get
Yeah.
to the point where you have a disaster and not a, a good
Yeah.
company or a safe space shuttle flight.
Right, exactly. Yeah, those were really memorable examples. So the engineers at NASA were really focused on the results. They were talking, if we got to have a launch on time, right? And so they were
Yeah,
really pushing just to happen on a certain date. And what that did was it caused people to hold back on questioning, is this O-ring really up to snuff here? Because the point was to be on time, and if you start asking questions, that slows down slows down the process. So going back to the
yeah.
process accountability. Yeah,
And
exactly.
even, questioning the tiniest things. He was talking about one of the youngest astronauts who was doing a spacewalk and he
Yeah.
noticed some liquid in his helmet. And like just like that, he moved and it got to the point where he was having trouble breathing in his own helmet.
Mhm.
And they had seen some liquid in the helmet when they came back from their first spacewalk, but they all just assumed where it came from, and
Mhm.
then you just from that tiny little assumption that you think doesn't even mean much, you get to the point where we almost lost an astronaut because of the danger he was in. And it
Yeah.
really makes you think about the assumptions that we all make every day and what
Mhm.
that assumption might lead to.
Mhm. Yeah, where is it? Let me see if I can find it. He said, "How do you know?" That's a question that we should ask
Yeah,
more often, right? In the
yeah,
workplace, in our lives, right? How do you know? Right? What's your evidence for saying
yeah.
that? Yeah, very
And the
good.
other thing about this section that I
Mhm.
did want to bring up because I remember it is um, he was talking about careers and identities and how
Mm.
so often our career is our identity. I am a. And talking especially about kids and how we really
Mm.
shouldn't ask kids
Yeah.
what you want to be when you grow up. What was it he said? I know I wrote it down. It's something about career is an action, not a
Mhm.
choice or not an identity. I think
Yes,
is the way he
yes.
phrased it.
We should ask kids about what they like to do, have them talk
Yes.
about their activities rather than
Yeah.
who they want to be, right?
Yeah.
And what they want to be when they grow up.
I still remember when I was in ninth grade, my counselor asked me, "So, what do you want to do when you grow up?" And
Mhm.
even at 14, when I didn't know anything, I remember thinking, "Oh my god, how do I answer that question? How do
Yes.
I know what I wanna do for the rest of my life?" I mean, I'm
Yes.
old enough that when I was in high school, you picked one thing, and then you did that thing for your entire life, and
Yeah.
that was it. You
Yeah.
didn't move around. If you got a
Yeah.
good position, you stayed there forever.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
I like that we're not, we
Yeah.
we should get to that place where we should think about how we ask little kids that question.
Yeah, I agree. That's a lot of pressure to put on a ninth
Yeah.
grader, but usually we're asking like
Yeah.
4-year-olds or
Yeah.
5-year-olds, you know?
Yeah.
And yeah, totally. I really liked that part as well. I thought that was really key. Yeah, very good. And I think it ties really well into kind of the bigger theme, which is like education isn't just taking in knowledge, it's skill set, right?
Yeah.
And if you're thinking in terms of developing a career in terms of the skills that you have, right, then yeah, you're not going to know when you're 5 what kind of skills you're going to gain or what you
Yeah.
like to do, right? But you can start there, right? You can, I like
Yeah.
to draw, I like to write, whatever it is, right? And I think that can lead to a much more valuable
Yep.
identity even, right?
There
In
was
that
one there was one thing he said that in that last section. Psychologists find that passions are often developed, not discovered. And I really
Mhm.
liked that idea that,
Yeah.
it's not like you have this passion and then that's it,
Yeah.
but that you might be interested in something, and the more you learn about it, that it does become a passion.
Yes, yes.
It was just an
Ties
interesting line.
right. Yeah, it ties really well into the idea that, every new activity that we undertake feels hard in the beginning because we really just don't have any way of perceiving what it's going to be like. And so
Mhm.
when you jump in, right, this analogy of the bridge will be underneath you or the trampoline will appear when you jump, right, that kind of thing. But it's so true that you really, once you get into it, you develop the skills that you need to see the project through or what
Yeah.
happens to be. I think that's
Yeah.
really key. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, there's so many great examples. I mean, the example in the beginning of the firefighters is really a memorable piece.
Mhm.
They were these fire jumpers, I think they're called, and they go into a forest fire, and they actually are on the ground running around putting out little fires. But what sometimes happens is the wind will switch directions and the fire will come back on them, and that's what happened in this particular case. And I think there was something like 12 firefighters, but the head guy suddenly had a brainstorm about how to put out fires.
Mhm.
And when this happened, he actually started lighting matches and throwing them on the ground around him. And apparently there was something about the oxygen that those fires would create, and he laid down on the ground, and he survived the fire, whereas most of his other firefighters
Yeah.
died. And Grant also talks about how they were running around with their equipment on their backs trying to escape the fire, and
Yeah.
how often, if they had just stopped and thought about what they were doing for a second, they might have, had a better outcome. So that was, he's got so many memorable examples. I was
Yeah.
telling Susan before we went live, this is one of the first social science books I've read where I felt like I couldn't put it down. I
Yeah.
just like plowed through. So usually, it's the research is great and I love it, but it can be dense, and it can
Mhm.
take more time to get through. But something about Grant's storytelling is just
Yeah.
really compelling. So if you
Yeah.
like social science, I highly recommend this as a book. You will love it. You will eat it up.
Yeah,
For sure.
it's so accessible.
Mhm.
The other really interesting example that he had was about BlackBerry and how they just got completely
Mm,
buried by the iPhone.
yes.
And he noted that the director of BlackBerry was gifted in rethinking the technology, but not willing to rethink the market after the iPhone came out, which I thought is such an interesting distinction that you could, you could be sort of you're willing to rethink one thing, but you're not willing to rethink something else.
Mhm.
And it's not like an all in or all out proposition.
Yeah, that was a really memorable piece as well. Even talking about how Steve Jobs in the beginning didn't really want to get into phones. He didn't want to
Yeah.
be a phone person, right? And then the iPhone has taken the world by
Yeah.
storm. Fascinating. Yeah, that one illustrates how important having a team. Like Grant even talks about how when he wrote the book, he has his own challenge
Yeah.
network that he gets people together to actually like pick apart his arguments and poke holes if they can in what he's writing. And I just love that idea of like a team of rivals or whatever you want to call it, right? You want to hire disagreeable people if you're looking to hire team members, not yes people, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And he actually showed the results of his challenge network in the epilogue, which is actually,
cool.
you see the edits he made as he went along. And that ties into another, one of the examples he gave about kids and art, pictures of the butterflies. And talking about the rounds of feedback from this challenge network and doing more drafts, you know, don't just do it once, do it a few times. And how this fifth grader, I think, went from this really elementary style of a butterfly, and by the time he got to the fifth draft, it was radically different and far more lifelike. And you know, how even little kids can use that challenge network and how to get feedback, how to receive, how to give feedback, all really compelling stuff.
It really was. Yeah, I loved some of the tips about giving feedback, like tell people, I'm giving you this criticism because I believe you can do a great job, or I believe that you can do this amazing thing, and I really want to make you better, rather than, you know, just hammering on people with criticism. I thought that was fascinating. He talked about, you know, start a disagreement by asking, can we debate, rather than, oh, you're wrong, right? Which is kind of the first thing we think of when we argue with someone, right? So many great, you know, ideas about debating with people. Ask how rather than why you think what you think. So wait, what is it about this issue, gun control or whatever it is, that bothers you so much? What is it about wearing a mask that ruffles your feathers? Exactly, you know, rather than why do you think, you know, you shouldn't have to wear a mask, right?
It was really what was it called, the binary bias, how often we will reduce something to two different sides and that's it. And you know, he gave examples of gun control and what was the other one? I can't remember the other example he gave. I don't remember. But this idea that, and I mean, that kind of explains the entire country right now. You know, we get so, he talked about issues becoming our identities. So, you know, you're not just a Republican. If you're a Republican, you don't wear a mask, you don't get a vaccine. It's part of who you are. And because it goes so far to your identity, it's that much harder to get someone to be able to rethink and what they know and what they don't know and start to question things. And I mean, it just, this book kind of explains kind of where the whole country's been for the last few years, and this, you know, how polarized we are. And it's really not, it's not that simple.
Yeah, for sure. And I loved the example. We were talking about this before we went live too. He talks about the pandemic in the book, and we're thinking that he probably went back and added those parts in. I imagine most of the book was written before the pandemic, but he does have these examples about vaccinations, which were really fascinating. And I do think he's talking about, you know, he's talking about measles and mumps. I don't think he's talking about COVID-19 vaccine, which must have happened long after the book was probably in print. But he talks about how interesting it is. Like, if you want your friends who aren't vaccinated to get vaccinated, the best thing is not actually to give them all the information about how vaccines are safe and how effective they are and all of that, because that can actually counter what you want to happen, right? What you want to do is ask questions and be a really respectful and active listener, and really listen to the other side, because then it softens people when you start to do that, right? Then they feel respected. If you come at them with all the reasons that you're right and they're wrong, they're just gonna curl up into a ball and get really defensive, right? And that can actually like make them stronger in their own beliefs, because they put up those defenses and they won't hear anything that you're saying.
He had a line that I actually wrote down: the act of resistance fortifies our psychological immune system. So the more you resist an idea, you actually build up antibodies to any other views,
Yeah,
which
so
closes
fascinating.
off rethinking completely. I
Right.
also liked when he talked about the fact that the more does not equal better, like you just said.
Mhm, mhm,
That
mhm,
usually just prompts someone to dig their heels in even deeper again.
mhm.
So,
Yes.
uh, when you were in high school or college, did you have debate teams?
Yeah, I was on the debate team in
You
college.
were okay.
Yep,
That
yep,
doesn't
yep.
surprise me at all.
Yeah.
I was trying to remember. I don't think my high school had a debate
No,
team.
our high school didn't either. No,
Okay.
it's
Yeah,
interesting.
I'm sure there was when I went to college as well.
Hmm.
But in one of the chapters, he talks about debating and
Yeah.
how we need to become argument literate, which
Hmm.
I think is another really great phrase about how to argue and how to debate without
Yes.
it descending into
Right.
curse words and
Yes.
and
Right.
and
Right.
nasty things about your
Uh-huh.
opponent,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah, it's so funny. I love that part. And what really jumped out at me the whole time I was reading, I was thinking about my students because
Mm,
they would ask questions and they would get so tired when I would start giving them the complex answer, right? It seemed like what they wanted was, what do I need to know for the test? Not
yeah.
like, but I would always give them like the background and here's why it matters and long-winded answers. And so I was thinking about that and I was like, I don't know, Grant. And then I got to the part where it was like, you need to be a non-abrasive Socrates. Somebody's quote. It wasn't Grant's quote, but somebody quoted. What you want is to be a non-abrasive Socrates. And I was like, yes, because Socrates pissed everybody off with his questions, And so
Yeah.
it made a lot of sense that, yeah, you want to ask questions, you want to be open and listen, but at the same time, right, it's not easy. There's no simple answer in a lot of cases.
Yeah, he talked about this technique of motivational
Yes,
interviewing,
yes.
which I found fascinating. And actually, I literally want to go try to find someone who teaches this because he mentions that you can learn it. It's asking open-ended questions, engaging in reflective listening, which,
Mhm.
he actually talked about how you listen
Yeah.
is very much a part of it, and
Mhm.
affirm the person's desire and ability to change. It's not
Yes.
about motivating someone to change, it's motivating them to explore more for themselves.
Exactly. Oh,
Yeah.
yes. That was really key. I loved the motivational interview
Yeah,
idea.
I
Yeah.
just and he kind of really breaks it down in detail. He talks about this vaccine whisperer who was
Hmm.
able to
Right.
convince certain people to get the measles
Hmm.
vaccines for their
Hmm.
children. And he even went through a couple of examples where he said, well, he showed two people talking, so what the conversation would be like. And it was just fascinating. I think, we do very much get into the preacher or the politician or the prosecutor
Hmm.
mode. It's like,
Yep.
I know I'm right. Here's these facts. You have to listen to them. They're facts. And it makes me think about how I can listen differently
Mm.
and listen in a way that encourages the conversation instead of closes down the conversation.
Yes, so important. Yes, I was thinking about that a lot, talking
Yeah.
to parents, my friends, even talking to my clients and how to be a better
Mm-hmm.
listener. I think all of that is really, really key. The last thing I want to say, the thing that I really loved is in the back, there's a bunch of like practical applications. So
Mm-hmm.
he doesn't do the typical like summarize each chapter, which I kind
Yeah.
of appreciate because that part I usually just fly through
Yeah.
because whatever, I don't need to reread what I just read. But I did like the way he summarized it kind of in the end with like, here are the practical applications that I raised throughout the book. That was a nice
Yeah.
review, I thought.
Yeah. It really was. I mean, I could see. I mean, this would be if you're in a bigger company, this would be a great thing to read as a team, as a
Yeah.
department.
Mhm, mhm,
I think it could really open up conversations about how teams make decisions, how departments make decisions,
mhm,
encouraging those people to talk who might be reticent to talk because they're worried
mhm.
they don't have that psychological safety. Uh,
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
even without that kind of summary, again, there's a lot of actionable
Mhm.
information in the
Oh,
book
yes. Oh,
that
yes.
you can
Yeah.
really use to change something.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great read to read with
Yeah.
together with a team for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
and to talk about all the different facets. Yes, I think I'll be rereading it to sort of imprint it on my brain as much as
Yeah.
possible. So much good
Yeah.
stuff in here.
Yeah.
So much useful information. So yeah, I was also saying this is the first Adam Grant book I've read. I kind of became aware of him this summer because of that article he wrote around languishing, which was a really big New York Times article, really big, popular article. Mental health and that kind of thing around the pandemic. But yeah, so I think I'll probably go back and read some more of his books, some other of his books as well, now that I've gotten my feet wet.
Yeah,
really good
he's
stuff.
he's a really good author. I can see why he's so popular and his books are always on the bestseller list. He's giving you a ton of really good information, but so many examples and so accessible that it's really easy to get his point and to think about things differently.
Yes, very cool. I think the points will live on for a long time too. They're not just very trendy.
Yeah, I'm glad you suggested this one.
Yeah, cool. Me too. Yeah, that was a fun one. So speaking of our next review, probably in a month or so, depending on how our schedules work out, we are going to read Charlie Gilkey's book, Start Finishing. That's going to be our next choice. So if you're reading along with us or you want to hear the review of the book before you read it, whatever, cool. Check out Start Finishing. And I don't have a copy to show you. I don't know what it looks like yet. So I'll have to make that happen this week. So
yeah, and I think mine might be on my Kindle. So
there you go. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think that'll be another really fun one. It's been on my list for a while. So.
Yeah, me too.
All right, Susan, this was fun as always. Thank you for joining me. Great book. All right, everyone. Talk to you soon.
We'll see you next month.
Yay.